People need to hear it, and I think unless you say it, you're going to be haunted for the rest of your life.
I let down my friends. I let down the country. I let down our system of government, and the dreams of all those young people that ought to get into government but will think it's all too corrupt and the rest. Most of all, I let down an opportunity that I would have had for 2.5 more years to proceed on great projects and programs for building a lasting peace.
People need to hear it.
All right, folks. David Frost couldn't help but ask the question again. Roger Stone joins us, editor and publisher of The Stone Zone, veteran political consultant and former advisor to Richard Nixon, and the author of Nixon's Secrets. And Roger, great to see you as always.
Great to be with you.
And congratulations on the success. You're on a 21-city tour for the book, and Nixon's Secrets is a bestseller. And you're beating, most importantly, I think to me, is you're beating John Dean in his book, correct?
Yeah, the important thing here is you've got 2 books in the marketplace, and John Dean says that his book is based on 463 new tapes, 1,000 hours of transcripts, but he won't let anyone look at those transcripts for independent verification. And more importantly, he omits or truncates the conversations of March 13th, 16th, 17th, and 20th, 1973.
And the significance of that?
All about the Watergate.
Right.
So it paints a more benign picture of Mr. Dean, and it denies Nixon a number of the exculpatory things. If you listen to those tapes, for example, you'd hear Dean arguing with Nixon for executive clemency for the burglars, and Nixon saying, no, that would be wrong for sure. But Dean airbrushes that out of history.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, and very unfortunately. And you talk about, how Nixon, they talk about dirty tricks and Richard Nixon, and but he was also a victim of dirty tricks.
No, it's extraordinary. The Kennedys not only wiretapped Nixon's hotel suite on the eve of the famous Nixon-Kennedy debate, they also had somebody break into his psychiatrist's office and steal his medical records in New York City, had someone break into Howard Hughes' accountant's office to steal financial records of dealings with Richard Nixon. They eavesdropped at the Republican National Committee. These were the most ruthless political operators, as Nixon says, that he had ever come across. And in the end, despite many mistakes, they stole the 1960 election. I very detail this in the book. The mob and the Daily Machine stole Chicago.
Yeah.
But more importantly, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the champion vote stealer of all times, stole Texas. Nixon only lost Texas by 46,000 votes. Lyndon Johnson burned 54,000 Nixon Lodge ballots in Dallas County alone on election night. So it was a fraud. And you wonder why Nixon was paranoid? You'd be paranoid too if a millionaire gangster stole the presidency for his Playboy son.
When you see the David Frost portion we just showed leading into this segment, and you hear what the president had to say, what goes through your mind?
Well, I think, unfortunately, that in the ashes of Watergate get lost all the great accomplishments. I mean, Nixon not only ended the war in Vietnam, brought our troops home, ended the military draft, opened the door to China, using that to play off against the Russians to get a deep arms control agreement that saved this country literally billions. He desegregated the schools without violence or bloodshed. He desegregated the trade unions. He passed the first environmental protection, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act.
Saved Israel.
And saved Israel in the Six-Day War over the objections of Kissinger, over the objections of the State Department, over the objections of the Defense Department. He is the greatest friend Israel ever had. Now contrast that with what we have today in Barack Obama, who seems intent on embarrassing and hurting Israel to weaken them so they'll make concessions to the Arabs.
A lot of people, some know this. I don't know if this will be brought up if she runs for president or not. But her role in the Watergate hearings and the drawing up impeachment, talk about that. I mean,
people don't realize.
She was very rude to a lot of people.
No, there is a Hillary-Nixon connection that's very historic and important. In 1964, Hillary Clinton, then Hillary Rodham, was fired from the House Nixon Impeachment Committee, the so-called Rodino Committee, for leaking and lying, for denying Nixon due process. Now, she held this grudge for 40 years. When Bill Clinton became president and President Nixon authorized me to reach out to President Clinton to try to set up a meeting, And I went through various intermediaries, including Dick Morris, a friend of this show, and Paul Bagala and James Carville and other friends in the trade, as it were. They kept saying, yes, he's going to be invited. Yes, the president's going to reach out to him, but he never did. When we found out what happened, Hillary repeatedly blocking Nixon from meeting with Clinton. Finally, Clinton overrules her. Nixon and Clinton meet, and they hit it off. They both come from poor backgrounds. They both lost governor's races, the two comeback kids, as it were. And Nixon met Hillary. I said, Mr. President, what did you think? He said, she's cold, cold as ice.
You know, my one regret is coming oh so close to meeting Richard Nixon, because we did a sports talk show in New York with Art Rush Jr. at WABC, and we would see Richard Nixon and George Steinbrenner's box all the time, and we almost arranged it. I didn't know you at the time. Maybe that would have helped to get him on the show, but it just never happened. Talk about the talk about sports, the Wilt Chamberlain incident that you write about in Nixon Secrets.
Pat Buchanan has written a terrific book called The Greatest Comeback, and it's really for the period between 1966, 1965, and 1968. It's a phenomenal book, and I urge your viewers to get it. But he writes in his book that when Martin Luther King was assassinated, Nixon decided to go to the funeral. He decided to march behind the caisson, the mule-driven caisson, to the cemetery from the church. And that's not really accurate. Nixon was trying to win votes in the South. He had an excellent relationship with Dr. King. In 1957, in the Civil Rights Bill, when Kennedy and Johnson were essentially watering the bill down, Nixon was pro-civil rights. So he goes to the funeral, but he decides not to march. In fact, he's going to slip out the side door after the service.
Until he sees...
Until there's a huge black hand on his shoulder, and 7'1" Wilt Chamberlain says, Mr. Nixon, you ready to march?
And he had met him before.
Yes, so Nixon says, oh yes, Wilt, of course, we'll march. They march 3 blocks. Nixon keeps looking at his watch. His car is in the distance. Finally, he says, Wilt, I really have a plane. Would you take me to New York? Chamberlain says, Mr. Nixon, do you mind if I catch a ride? They both flew to New York City.
That is very funny. Wonderful book. Congratulations on it, and continued success. Nixon Secrets by the great one and only Roger Stone. Great to see you, sir.
Steve, thank you very much.
I love the suit, and I mean that from the, I love it.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're coming back with more of the show, but first, stay tuned for your Newsmax Now update only on Newsmax Television. Don't you go away.